In this presentation entitled Blurred Lines, Patrick Lee Lucas and I, Rebecca Radke, consider the interiors at the scale of a city, and we suggest that interior design can and perhaps should help frame design practices at the scale of the urban environment. Traditionally, interior design has been defined as a treatment of an interior space, addressing color, light, and finish materials bound by the interior of a building, ensuring that it is functional and both safe. Interior design is all of those things, but how can it be more? How can light, color, and materials impact the built environment on a bigger scale? How can it address the human experience more holistically beyond just a building and outside in the city? At what scale does it occur? What we believe is that the principles of interior design impact a much larger scale to enhance the quality of life and culture beyond the interior of a building, but in a larger scale to be the interior of a city. How does that scale impact how we design? Thinking from the smallest of scales, as the Eames did, to encompass a much larger territory. If we consider interiors on the scale of the city, isn't the streetscape an interior, the spaces in between buildings, and the courtyard all types of interior spaces? These are all interiors in their own right, utilizing color and light materials to enhance the quality of life and culture. So this is both an interior and an urban, both on a scale that address the holistic human experience beyond the building, making cities designed for people. To mobilize this theory, we effectively completed a pilot study project that investigates how interiors can be broadly defined to include the urban scale.
And in order to do that, we turn to the work of Kevin Lynch in The Image of the City from 1960, a classic work that tells us that a city is made of 5 component parts: a district, a cohesive, identifiable part of town, as we will soon see, a sort of mid-century strip, paths, which are usually the roadways and streets that form the flows in the community, large and small, edges, where 2 different pieces or districts of the city come together, typically along a path, nodes, the special spaces in a city that are activity hubs, and finally landmarks, those buildings and spaces that give a city its signature identities. If that's true at the scale of the city, what about Lynch's work at the scale of the interior? So we see districts as perhaps a block of shops or one area of a grocery store, as we're seeing here on this image, or pathways at storefronts or grocery aisles, or edges, the storefront itself, thinking about inside really as a blurred line itself because of the visual acuity that one has from inside to outside along that shop front space. Nodes as a cash register station perhaps in the grocery store, and finally landmarks, perhaps the Good Foods Coffee Bar, which is a local hangout in the spaces that we investigated for this particular project. We also look at the work of Stewart Brand, who is a writer who wrote How Buildings Learn. He wrote about 6 ideas, stuff, which is the interior of the everyday kinds of things that we live with, the space plan, which is the idea of how a building is laid out that lasts somewhere between 3 and 30 years, the systems, the heating, ventilating, and cooling that make spaces habitable, those last between 7 and 15 years, the skin of the building, 20-plus year commitment, or the structure of the building, which may last from 30 to 300 years. And finally, what Brand calls the eternal condition, which is the site. Though Brand's theories are about buildings, how might we conceive of community spaces and the city of thinking in the same layers? And on the next slide, we'll see student work that chronicles the idea of Brand and The Clock of the Long Now, his other book, which really looks at the ideas of a city given the idea of nature, laws, standards, and regulations, attitudes, work processes, habits, and technologies, all of things which are useful to understand cities, spaces, places, streetscapes, buildings, and interiors, as well as people and their behavior in the built environment.
In this case study, we applied these frameworks to better understand how interior design can be utilized in the urban realm. In the context of Southland Drive in Lexington, Kentucky, we investigated a mid-20th century suburban shopping district. For this investigation, students took to the street, analyzing human activity and behaviors through applied research methodologies. Students created recommendations for how to activate the streetscape and utilize color and light and materials to increase walkability and usability to make our city a more active and vibrant streetscape that activates our own community. This work was recognized because it engaged both the city and the university into a design process, and to look at our own city as a point, as in this case study, and to understand how we can be more livable and more friendly as a city. This project engaged the School of Interiors, Landscape Architecture, the city's Department of Planning, Tracy Farmer Institute for Sustainability, and Historic Preservation to invest in how design can impact our community. So in conclusion, to prove via case study, these are the strengths that interior design can bring to a project. The sensitivity of the human dimension, the understanding of human behavior, awareness of social interactions in the built environment, and how we as interior designers can be better advocates for humanity within the built condition. This brings our strengths as interior designers to the scale of the city and benefits our city. These are things that designers do well and can address what our cities need, and that's a place for people.
So as we think about these ideas from across the Atlantic in this digital presentation, we certainly gladly welcome your comments and thank you for listening as we considered this Southland Drive area of our community.